Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to today's speaker event, The Trump Whisperer Comes to Town. My name is Ewan. I'm a first year in a college studying economics and political science. On campus, I work as the managing editor of UChicago's independent student newspaper, Chicago Maroon. And I'm really honored to introduce today's speaker with us, Maggie Hieberman. Maggie has Maggie has been a White House correspondent in the New York Times since 2015. She was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize in 2018 for reporting on Donald Trump's advisors and their connections to Russia. She previously covered the Trump administration and continues to cover Donald Trump and politics in Washington. Today, she will be discussing her new book, Confidence Man, The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America, with Mark Leibovich. Mark Leibovich is a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of Thank You for Your Servitude, Donald Trump's Washington and the Price of Submission. Before joining The Atlantic, he spent a decade as the chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine in Washington, D.C. Before the event starts, please turn off or silence your phone to minimize distractions. When it is time for questions, a microphone will be moving throughout the room. Please stay seated and raise your hand. If you're interested in more events like this, the IOP's Pritzker Fellow, Steve Hayes, will moderate a conversation with Congresswoman Liz Cheney on Monday at 5:30 p.m. in Mendel Hall, where she will talk about her career and the future of the GOP. Then on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. in the IOP House, the audience will have the chance to talk to journalist Karen Blockinger from the Marshall Project in the event Restoration, the Power of Narrative, and One Women's Journey from Prison to Journalism. Visit politics.uchicago.edu for more information about upcoming events. Now, please join me in welcoming Maggie and Mark.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Leibovich, as you just heard. It is an honor to be here at the IOP. This is a great organization, and to appear with Maggie, who is my longtime colleague and friend at the Times, is an added honor. And to sort of have known Maggie over the years and sort of seen the process of the Trump coming into office and her beginning the book and her just sort of somehow remaining upright through all of this. And and then you add to this the madness of having a #1 best-selling book now 2 weeks in a row. You should all know this. This is the stuff we pay attention to. Is great. And before I start and before we turn it over to the star of the day, a couple of plugs. One for the book. The book is great. And I am someone who, having written my own book, I had to read every preceding Trump book that came before, many of them, so others didn't have to, but also I could be versed in all of this. This is, and you get to reading these things and you think, what else could possibly be said about this? What else is there possibly to learn? Trust me on this. This is a big and substantial and incredibly important and satisfying read. The thing about Maggie is she has a reputation, rightly, as a scoop machine. She has broken some of the most important news of these last several years. I mean, not just starting with Trump, but I mean over a couple of decades, but certainly of the Trump years. And you could talk all day about those scoops and about, we could talk about her Pulitzer that she won for this, but ultimately what I think Maggie is so good at and people don't appreciate enough is she's a great explanatory journalist, meaning she doesn't just throw scoops out there. She has the depth of knowledge and the historical perspective on this guy that sort of embeds every paragraph with context that makes you smarter, in addition to the basic information that makes us smarter. So anyway, I'm a huge fan. I'm honored to be here. And with that, we will start. I guess, and we're going to be all over the place because, this is just all over the place. Maggie, I have seen you several times over the years bristle at the title of being a Trump whisperer. As recently as about 10 minutes ago.
10 seconds.
10 seconds ago. Yes, actually. Yeah, okay. Why do you bristle at this?
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you to the IOP for hosting this. I'm a huge fan of this institution, I'm a huge fan of Mark Leibovich. Really, really fun to be doing this with you, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Because it's not the context of the whisperer comes from horse whisperer, as you know, which is you're soothing the horse, and that's, he's a subject who I cover, and I don't. In the horse whisperer, the horse doesn't turn to the whisperer and call them a maggot, which is what he called me, earlier this year.
That is true.
And actually even more recently. So, I think it just sort of, it misconstrues what's happening. He's a subject who I cover the same way that I have covered Rudy Giuliani or Mike Bloomberg or Hillary Clinton or at more of a remove 3 presidents. And I think that, he reacts differently to coverage, and I think that's what the difference is.
Right.
But so that's why I bristle at it.
Got it. Okay. No more whisperer here, by the way. No one call her a whisperer in the questions. By the way, at the end of it, I'm going to ask Maggie questions for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to turn to audience questions. So think of questions, and we will do this in a wonderfully orderly fashion. There is a scene in the book. Why don't we start in 2016? Because, obviously, this book is a historical perspective, but I personally sort of tuned him out until about maybe 10 years ago, until I absolutely kind of had to, when he was, in our lives every day. There's a scene in the book where you talk about him getting elected and you writing an email to I think it was Elizabeth Buemiller, one of our bosses, saying, you have no idea what's coming.
It was Adam Nagurney.
Adam Nagurney, one of our former colleagues. Yeah. You have no idea what's coming, meaning this presidency is unlike anything we will ever cover before, ever have covered, ever will see again. Has it been about what you expected? Has it been worse? Has it been better?
It was what I expected. I mean, it was, not always the specifics, but certainly the arc, and the arc of sort of the chaos and the arc of the self-destruction. And those are the 2 hallmarks of how Donald Trump functions. And then, amid all that chaos and amid all of that dysfunction, some things do get done. And that's what has happened throughout his entire life, too. Now, his business career was never what he said it was. I would argue that the building successes that he had early on, he never really duplicated them because he did licensing agreements to put his names on building. They were not the same thing. And he was never the business whiz that he claimed. But, things happened in his life. He became a reality television star, and without which he wouldn't have become president. But there's just so much dysfunction and dust clouds surrounding everything he does. January 6th, didn't surprise me, but it was a sickening day, and it was sickening to watch. The hold he has maintained on the party, beginning again very shortly after leaving office, that has surprised me.
Do you think, and this is obviously hypothetical, how do you think Trump would have reacted to some stronger pushback from the Kevin McCarthys and the Mitch McConnells and the Lindsey Grahams of the world?
I think he would have reacted poorly, but I think it would have been very important. I think that, McConnell, while he did not vote for impeachment on the second trial, did give a speech that was pretty excoriating of Trump. Right. McCarthy did give a speech on the floor shortly after January 6th, saying that Trump bore some responsibility. But then if McCarthy doesn't fly down to Mar-a-Lago, I think, within 2 weeks after Trump leaves office, I'm not sure that Trump, recovers the way he did.
Right.
And Graham, too. I mean, there was that very memorable moment on January 6th when Graham is at the podium and he says something like, enough is enough, or, I'm out.
Right.
And no, he wasn't. And I bumped into Graham twice at Trump's, around Trump during doing interviews for this book. So, I think that it wouldn't necessarily have impacted, every voter. I still think Trump has a hold on about 30% of the base.
Yeah.
But it would have impacted enough.
Did you ever think in the hours of election night 2016, or even the days after that it could have gone differently, that he actually might have reverted to something in the ballpark of a serious, quasi-pivoting president who actually was, took the job more seriously than he appeared to from outside?
Nope.
You didn't? Okay.
No, and because there was just, it isn't just that he, doesn't like being, within a behavioral norm. He actively prefers the other and seeks it out. So, he, when I was reporting for the book, I found from talking to some people that Bill Barr, his last Attorney General, actually his last Senate-confirmed Attorney General, had said to some people that he felt like, sorry, what's the fact? It's true. That he felt like he had been sort of baffled at Trump's, preference for people or interest in people like Roger Stone or Rick Grinnell, the former ODNI.
Yeah.
And he came to realize that he really just kind of gravitates toward them. And so that is who he is. Now, I didn't expect a fight about crowd size on literally his first day in office. And I didn't expect him to go to in front of the Wall of Heroes at the CIA and give a campaign speech where he talked about that. But I should have. This is fundamentally who he is. And one of the things that I think, what always looks like him picking a fight or taking the fight, in times of great stress, he tends to burrow down on some tiny slight, and he obsesses on it for days and days and days, and the crowd size thing was one of them as he was stepping into this incredibly stressful situation.
It's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. Speaking of Bill Barr, there is a detail that I remember reading somewhere. I forgot who it was. It all kind of blends together. But he said Trump once told him that when he tweets, you want to put just enough crazy in there.
It was in Bill Barr's book.
Actually, it was in his own book. That's true. I've seen various accounts over the years of people asking Trump, how much of this is an act? How much of this are you actually, you're not really as crazy as sometimes you come across? I mean, I've heard various takes on it. What's yours?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that sometimes this is one of the things that it makes it so confusing for both people trying to interpret him from this side of the wall and then people who are on his side of the wall. They encounter something similar. Sometimes the all caps tweets were him being very angry, and sometimes he would send them as he was laughing. And knowing which one it was could be hard to tell. Things that would bother other politicians generally didn't bother him. Negative coverage that would bother other people about policy or about things that went to the heart of his self-image, that does bother him. And
which is what? Because there are a lot of things that you would think would but didn't.
His intelligence. So one of the times he got very angry at me during the presidency in 2017 was he saw me on television on Charlie Rose's show, which he only saw because he was flipping commercials during Lou Dobbs. And this is a true story. And he saw me on television saying that he watches a lot of television. And he got angry that I would say that he watches a lot of television because, of course, that's not true. And he takes that as some kind of a dig at his intelligence, as opposed to just a fact. But he's very sensitive on that. Things that cut at his sense of strength or manliness. Those are things about his net worth. Those are things about his self-image that he takes significant issue with and that he will react to in a way he doesn't react to other things.
Because I mean, most people who are really wealthy are kind of embarrassed about it or try to be. I mean, there's a level of humility that certainly politicians try to assume that he never really subscribed to at all. I mean, he sort of losers talk, right?
Well, I mean, remember suckers and losers. I mean, his whole thing is, rules are for suckers and losers. Certain behavioral characteristics are for suckers and losers. There's obviously been a decades-long question about his actual net worth and what his wealth, and he went to a lot of effort to keep himself on the Forbes wealth list. He was famously deposed in a lawsuit he brought against Tim O'Brien, the journalist who's now at Bloomberg, and Tim won the suit after a couple of years. But in the deposition, Trump said that his net worth goes up and down with his feelings, and so this is right
as one
does. As it does, right.
I'll pay for my Uber to the airport with my feelings.
But so he is very sensitive about anybody figuring out his actual financial state.
Why did you call it Confidence Man, and what did you mean by
So there's two meanings, obviously. One is certainly that he is somebody who believes in projecting confidence in all scenarios. That's true. The other is that, literally a confidence man is somebody who gains people's trust in order to take things from them. And I think that both definitions work here.
Right. Did he like the title?
I am very, very strongly told he did not like the title.
Okay. This you've probably gotten this a lot. What have you heard about his reaction to the book and to you and your promotion of it?
So he was really upset about the first piece of reporting I put out, which was 8 months before the book came out, about how he was flushing documents down the toilet in the White House. Yeah. Anyway, and so
as one does.
That was as one does, but he was very upset about that. Very upset. And then I think that for him, I think he was seeing it as sort of a toilet story as opposed to how I was seeing it, which was a document story, right?
Yeah.
And a documents destruction story. But he was very angry about that. And then I think that other pieces that have come out since he's been a little less bothered by. He's not going to read it.
Not a big
So
reader.
I mean, it's not. His reactions are based on what he's told about what's in it.
Right. You think he'll talk to you again?
I don't know.
Did you have that question?
I mean, so when somebody asked me, he gave you these interviews for this book, and I explained that he gave an interview to almost every single book author who was writing a book about him last year, and there were a lot of people writing books about him last year. One of whom was Michael Wolff, who wrote Fire and Fury, which was the first book-length account of the dysfunction in the Trump White House.
Right.
So, he rarely totally closes a door, but who knows? I'll cover him whether he does or doesn't.
What was the experience like interviewing him for the book versus your experience talking to him for other stories you've done over the years?
That's a good question. So he, in a weird way, for the first interview, he was strangely more voluble. He was in salesman mode, and I was asking a lot of questions about history and about his past in New York, because he's the only person who can answer some of those questions, even if I know that there's a very strong chance that he's not telling me the truth. But I still have to ask the questions. And he seemed delighted to be talking about anything other than his presidency at points during that interview, which I was pretty struck by. And he really was trying to be selling. It was not the same as certainly talking to him on the phone or, in interviews prior to him becoming president. And then when he was president, so much of it was just sort of rolling heavy over the Resolute desk that it was just an entirely different thing.
How much he seems oddly nostalgic in his own way, and I think one of the reasons, the pre-presidency, you were there for the pre-presidency, you wanted to talk to him about topics for this, and nostalgia is almost a lot of what he built his campaign on. It's make America great again, whenever this was, whatever this was. But, to some degree, I think that that's probably a way to get him to open up in some ways.
Yeah, I think that was part of why he was valuable. I think that he was, he lives in the past. That's just, the past was always better, and there's a strange kind of preserved and amber quality stuck in 1984 about how in New York City, about how he views the world. But he was clearly happy to be talking about, long ago corrupt politicians, long ago district attorneys, long ago. He prefers looking backwards, always, and trying to get him to look. I tried to get him in the third interview to talk about 2024, and that was not what he wanted to talk about. He said 2024, sort of quizzically. He would much rather be looking backwards.
As someone who likes to look backwards, how do you think he projects forward, how he will be remembered? He seems to have great disdain for the question of legacy. There's an anecdote, I don't know if it was in your book or someone's, where on January 6th, people were kind of rushing in and saying, Mr. President, your legacy is going to be tarnished. And he said, if I lose to Joe Biden, that will be my legacy, and something, I'll be dead, something like that. But how much of this do you think is just sort of him trying to just run up the score before the buzzer rings and he's done?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is what it is. I mean, he doesn't think about legacy. He doesn't think about almost anything in the normal ways that people think about things, right? He doesn't think about legacy that way. He doesn't think about press coverage that way. You know, legacy is I was president and you're not. And that is a score running
I mean, other presidents have said that, basically. I mean, jokingly usually, but yes, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right that others have said it. But others also look at, you know, I mean, he does have the list of things that he believes he accomplished, and he will talk about those. And he talks about those not infrequently. And then sometimes they're not real, but some of them are. And, you know, I'll give you a for instance on legacy, on how he thinks about it. Legacy is almost some kind of a living organism where it just depends on how people are receiving him in any given moment, as opposed to how he wants to be remembered. He wants to be remembered as long as the right people like him. So he was complaining to people in the last year that he couldn't talk about the vaccine for COVID. Right. Which was, you know,
arguably one of the most important.
Arguably one of the most important parts of his presidency, and something that, you know, like, was he literally in the lab designing it? No, but he did push for the time frame on working with the drug manufacturers. And if you get blamed for everything, you get credit when something works out. He was complaining that he can't talk about it because of the quote unquote radical right. And that's pretty telling, because he could talk about it if he wanted to, but it's so much of what he does is about, you know, what's the line, you know, where are my people going? I must go lead them, you know, and so like that's a lot of it.
Well, also criminal justice reform is something that probably no other Republican would have done. Or argue. I mean, I know there was some energy for the right, from the
Kochs.
Yes, to actually do that. Yeah. But he doesn't like to talk about that either.
Well, he doesn't like it. I mean, that one is, that was very much in his mind a Jared Kushner thing. And it was, to your point, it's actually a topic on which a lot of ground had been plowed prior to the Trump presidency. Right. Jared Kushner cared about it because his father was in jail, and he had been in jail, and he took it as a very personal issue. Trump signed it. I asked him, here, I'll read it to you if I may.
Right.
Borrow this copy of Confidence Man.
Dog-eared.
I sent Trump a list of fact-check questions.
I saw that. I was going to ask you about this.
And they look like this, and these are his Sharpie notes after our interviews. And one was about, I asked him about criminal justice reform, which I knew that he had been expressing regret about signing, because the Republican base is just not in favor of it at all, and especially, you know, right now when Republicans are trying to hit crime as such an issue in the midterms. So I asked about him repeatedly expressing regret over criminal justice reform. You know, will he comment on this? And he writes back in his Sharpie, did it for African Americans. Nobody else could have gotten it done. Got zero credit. And
underline zero.
Underline zero. And so that's, you know, he did it, but he regrets doing it. And I think if he felt, you know, when he says zero credit, what he means is he thought that in his mind, he literally was doing this for black voters. Sure. As if the only people impacted by the criminal justice system would be black, and therefore would transactionally support him. Right. And because he didn't get the support he felt that he should, it wasn't worth doing.
Right. In the same way, I guess last week, didn't he suggested that Jews were ungrateful?
Yes.
And should have voted, American Jews should vote for him more as opposed to Israeli Jews.
Who would elect him prime minister, according to him.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about, okay, so there is this great, in the middle of the book, in the picture section, you know, Maggie includes a lot of the fact check sheets she sent down to Mar-A-Lago or wherever he was, and he marks it up. But what is it like when you are at the end of a book and you have this marked up copy, some that just say false, false, false? You know he's spinning in some ways. I mean, what do you do with all this?
Just put it in the book. I mean, so number one, he was 2 weeks late in answering it. I gave them, I think it was a month. And I kept asking for it, and it took a really long time to get it back. And they finally got it back. And I thought it was, I just ran, you know, the bulk of it in the book because A, it was the fairest way to do it.
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna, some of it, like some of the things are definitely, he's claiming they're not true. I know are true. And I stand by the reporting on things that he's saying or not. But I also thought it was an interesting look at the way that he works, and I thought that would be sort of revealing because if you read through them, he starts out kind of aggressive and testy. Then he gets kind of bored. You can see it's like false, false, false.
There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, and then he gets engaged at the end. And the ones that he chose to confirm related to like calling Melania, then Knaus, his girlfriend at the time before she became his wife, out of central casting. Actually, some truth to that was the response. Or like confirming that he had taken Marla Maples to a Michael Bolton concert after he had won her back from Michael Bolton. It's just, and then almost everything else was false, fantasy question, and so forth.
So I assume these were printed out, he marked them up with his hand, and then you were sent back an email with them? Is that generally how this works?
I was sent them in a,
like a scan, right?
I was sent a scan of them. And the last line of it is "good night!" exclamation point, because he had apparently been doing them at night.
How, so I assume you've gotten dozens, if not hundreds of these over the years, right? These
Definitely not hundreds. I mean, I've gotten a lot of, Trump markups.
Do you keep them all?
No.
Why not? All right, fine. I retract the question. So you have, for the statistic reasons we do this, gone from being a newspaper reporter to a book writer the last couple of years. What's that been like?
It's different. It's different. The anxiety around, how something will be received when it's out in the wild, to, are people going to read this, like this, sort of understand what I'm trying to do with it? Because, it's not Fire and Fury. It's a different kind of book.
Sure.
And so, so it's been a transition, and it was difficult also just because the Trump story itself doesn't stop. There was so much news happening as I was reporting the book, and that was complicated as well.
Did you fall into a book writing routine?
No.
You didn't?
No, I fell into nothing. And my computer, walked around the house with me into whatever room I happened to be in, and if something, was clicking, then I was doing it. Generally I did my interviews in my living room. But
you did your interviews in your
yeah, or if they were Zoom ones in my bedroom. But yeah, there was no pattern.
And so you got it done. I mean,
yeah, it's done. It's definitely done. Yeah,
which is an incredible accomplishment. I mean,
thanks.
to finish, like what is it, 500 pages, 600 pages?
It's 508 pages.
It feels much shorter, but it's no. I mean, to be done is amazing. So then you get anxious for a million different reasons. You let it out into the wild. You read a few reviews. They're good. At least the ones I saw are good. How does that feel? I mean, to know that you survived.
Better than the alternative. I mean, it's
true, but to know that like you're there.
Look, it feels good. I mean, I'm very gratified by the reaction to this.
Yeah.
I'm really, really, really humbled by it. I have spent the last 6 years just sort of, I feel a little bit like, the person who's kind of like, there's bricks falling and you're running and you're trying to, so I'm trying to come out from that crouch a little bit.
Right.
So, but it feels good.
I mean, another thing about Maggie that you should know, she's a reporter's reporter. And, I'm, Jennifer Steinhauer, who invited us as a former colleague of ours at the Times. We've all been in newsrooms and stuff, and one of the first tenets of being in the newsroom is you don't want to be part of the story. And now all of a sudden, starting about a month ago, Maggie's been a quasi-public and a very well-known journalist for a long time. She is, you got to promote the book. You got to go out there. You got to do media and stuff. What's it been like to come out from that side of the notebook and camera and be on the other side?
It's not my favorite.
Correct. It was a shock.
Yeah, I don't really like talking about myself as much as I'm required to at the moment.
Right.
No, just because to your point, we're not the story. I mean, one of my favorite lines in any journalism movie, and one of, I think, the best journalism movies is Broadcast News.
Yeah.
And there's a great bit where Albert Brooks is watching a news story that William Hurt has shot with a date rape victim. And he includes a scene where the camera cuts to there's a second camera on William Hurt, and it cuts to him, and he's crying. And everyone's a little taken aback watching it. And someone says, I thought it was great afterwards. And Albert Brooks says, yes, let's never forget, we're the real story, not them. And
he's not wrong.
And so, and that's, it's just a different thing.
From going through this experience, what have you learned about the way the media sort of disseminates and filters Trump-related news?
That is a good question.
Second time she said that.
So yes, well, you've asked two good questions.
That's good. I
think,
way ahead of myself.
I think that. So I guess I would put it this way. I think that I was trying to looking at how I looked at a lot of coverage, a lot of old coverage for the book, and there's obviously been a huge discussion about media criticism and how did the media handle him in 2016. One area where I thought he didn't get enough attention was his business ties in the 2016 campaign. I do think that there could have and should have been more of a look at what does it look like to have a possible president who's got a tower with his name on it in Turkey. It's just fundamentally different.
Right.
And so I think there should have been more there. But in general, I think that voters had all the information they really needed to understand sort of the baseline of Donald Trump. I think there are individual stories, at least for myself, that I would go back and do differently. But in general, I think the coverage was pretty rigorous. Where I think there is a significant criticism is the 70s, 80s, and 90s in New York and nationally, as Trump was just myth-making about himself and selling himself as this titan of industry commensurate with the biggest tycoons on Wall Street, which is just not true. But you read this coverage, and it's like, why is he in the same sentence as Lee Iacocca or Jack Welch and I think that it was pretty clear when I would talk to reporters who covered him in those decades. It was pretty clear that people knew that he lied a lot, and yet the impetus and the impulse of news organizations is to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And there are a lot of times you couldn't prove that what he was saying wasn't true. Right. And so, I just think that and there was never somebody who sought media attention the way he did. I mean, one of the things that I remember a very senior White House aide saying to me in 2017 was that people just don't appreciate how much time he spends trying to keep himself in the news. He was a president.
Yeah.
I mean, the presidency comes with a fair amount of built-in media coverage.
Right.
And so I just think that, he exists in 10-minute increments of time, and we only exist in 24 hours, at least at the time. And now we exist in even less. And the symbiosis of that, I think, how that worked was not really clear to me until I started doing this book.
We're going to move to questions in a few minutes. There are a few kind of lightning roundish questions I have for you. No, I'm interested in how his relationship has changed post-White House with three people I care about, or I'm interested in. Melania.
I knew that's where this was going.
We had dinner last night.
I think the relationship is what it was before, which is, among other things, somewhat inscrutable to outsiders.
Right. Ivanka and Jared, I guess those are the other two. I'll put them in a couple.
Not great. He was enraged after their testimony, particularly hers, before the January 6th committee.
Really?
And when that was used at the public hearing by Liz Cheney knew exactly what she was doing when they used that testimony. And they all did. So did Raskin, so did Benny Thompson. And it worked, and he was very angry. And there was something of a thaw over the summer. But it's still not great.
So I assume he paid pretty close attention to the January 6th hearings?
He certainly paid close attention to the fact that his family members were shot on video. I don't think he was sitting, eating popcorn, but I think he definitely was aware of what was happening. Yeah.
He talks a lot about loyalty. How loyal is he really to his kids? You know, we talked about Jared and Ivanka. The boys.
He's actually, as I understand it, quite close to Eric Trump now, because
Really?
Eric Trump is the person who has, among other things, been dealing with the brunt of the business stuff. And the businesses are under a lot of scrutiny at the moment and facing legal pressures. There's a trial related to his company that's starting very soon and is expected to last several weeks.
This is the New York one.
This is the New York one, Manhattan District Attorney. You know, his son Don Jr. Is his firstborn and his namesake, and is always going to bear the brunt of whatever. But I don't think, I mean, Trump, one of the things that was striking to people in the White House was, even as he had Jared and Ivanka working there, and there's a whole separate issue as to whether it's, you know, you should have your children in the White House. There are nepotism laws for a reason. Even they are not exempt from,
Right.
you know, criticism from him or what. He's just, you know, it's all to a point.
Right. One last question before we move to audience questions. What do you think the single biggest misconception about Donald Trump out there is? Whether it's a exaggerated quality or unappreciated quality or what have you? Good question.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Something to work.
Thank you. Thank you. No, yes, it is a good question, Mark.
Okay, sorry.
There is a belief that he is both more strategic than he is, and also, I don't like this word, but dumber than he is. He is not. He is incapable of strategic thinking, but he is much more calculating moment to moment than people realize. And he is often playing some game that only makes sense to him. But I think that people do underestimate him a fair amount.
I lied. I have one more question.
Oh, okay, cool.
Do you think he really won? Do you think he really thinks he won the election?
I have no idea. I think at this point, I think he probably has convinced himself. But I don't think it matters at all. I think what he's saying is extremely dangerous.
Extremely
dangerous.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with that. Let's go to audience questions. I'm going to just alternate left to right, and I guess stand up to deliver your question, and we'll start with you. Oh, sorry, yeah, we're going to bring them, yeah, so there'll be a little gap, and their mic's going to come over, and then you can talk into the mic.
Thank you very much. Realizing you're not a physician or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, Maggie, but from all of your work and with Trump, do you have an opinion whether he is, how perhaps I perceive it or others, a very insecure individual?
Oh, yes. I don't think you need to be a therapist for that one. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, the way I write about it is just that he is a narcissistic drama seeker with a fragile ego, and that he is often covering up that fragile ego with all of these behaviors.
Thank you.
Sure.
You in the back with the glasses. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Yang. So, Harry Frankfurt, a philosopher, had a book on bullshit. And Trump is often reported by people as a liar, but this is a very strong statement. It has very high stakes. Sometimes he's not lying because he's not focused on the specific thing, but very diffusive. And his focus is always panoramic rather than particular. So, and also he was considered to be the king of knowing everything because he knows a lot of things much better than anybody else, as he claims. So I wonder, how does this unfocused, improvising, and diffusive Trump stand in the duality of the good and bad side of Trump in your book's prologue? And what is this Trump's legacy on the US presidency?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's one and the same. I think that, the way that you just framed the question is, I think the way the question was often framed about him, which was, he's not lying necessarily, he's just, but I guess I would flip it around on you when I ask him, and I write about this in the book, what you were doing on January 6th, were you watching television? And he says, no, I rarely had the television on. I don't think that's, embellishing. I don't think that's improvising. I mean, yes, I guess it's literally improvising, but another word for it is lying, because he knows he often had the television on, and every one of his aides would often talk about that. I think that there is, and this is sort of the benefit of the doubt piece that I'm talking about, there's no question that sometimes he improvises, and I think you raise an important point, which is not everything is the same as every other thing with him, right? I mean, so some of his behaviors, you know, were not always completely at odds with previous presidents, for instance. Some of his behaviors are not at odds with, you know, people in other industries. The problem is that when you have all of those behaviors in a presidency, it's very, very different. And so, you know, a businessman saying that his building is taller than it is weird, you know, that you're adding a bunch of floors onto your building that literally don't exist. But it's not, you know, it's not harming anyone. It has no ramifications. It's just that the presidency is so fundamentally different. You know, I think that by any definition, Donald Trump had led a remarkable life by the time he became president, and part of that is for the reasons that you identified. But I just think that the matter of the presidency is not about one man, and his presidency became very much about one man, and it's impossible for me to divorce those things.
You in the third row. Yeah. You. Yeah. Stand. There we go. Right person stood up. Yeah.
This is a short breaking news question. They issued the subpoena to Trump, the New York Times is reporting. What do you think he's throwing at the wall right now, and what do you predict he does next week?
Nothing. It's really not. This is one thing that I think gets misunderstood about him is he tends to look at everything in terms of, is it a criminal charge versus is it not a criminal charge? This is a congressional subpoena, number one. No, so yes, there will be the question of if he defies the subpoena, but his lawyers are already engaged. They're receiving the subpoena. He has told his aides that he wants to testify if they meet his conditions. You know, the main one is let him do it live because there's been this issue about the editing of videos. The committee has privately said it's actually open to that. I don't know what that ends up looking like. I don't know that he will ever end up testifying. But I think of all of his concerns right now legally, this is like here. I don't think that's a big one.
Would he go under oth? Would he be
open to go
open
under
to?
oath.
Well, not necessarily.
That's
you
true.
Can go,
yeah, but if you're lying to Congress, it's still the. I think. Yeah, I don't know. I assume that they will want him under oath, but I don't know.
Okay. All right. Let's see. You in the back, standing up. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Mark Miller. I'm not a student. Usually they have the students go first in questions, so I'm happy you're letting me ask a question.
Okay. If you want to defer to a student, you can now.
So I was a student once.
All right, good.
So I'm a Trump supporter, maybe the only one in the room. I hope there's a few others. So you didn't mention any of his accomplishments like low gas prices, low inflation, the border wall, growing stock market, of course, crime here in Chicago. I hope I don't get carjacked on the way out of here. But with that in mind, Trump, it's interesting we have so many people here that are interested in Trump who's not even doing anything now. Is he going to be a major force in 2024? And I feel he's going to win the presidency. What are your thoughts on that?
I was just wondering when there was a question in there. I did mention an accomplishment of his, the main one being the vaccine. The border wall didn't finish getting built. There's no question the economy was in better shape when he was president, at least until 2020 when there was COVID, and it became much more of a problem for everybody. I do think he's going to run. I think he has backed himself into a corner. I don't think he actually loves the idea of another campaign. Whereas I think in 2016, he hadn't thought much about the presidency, he thought about winning. I think now he really wants the presidency back, and I think is less interested in a campaign. Would he win? I think he's formidable for the nomination. And in a 50-50 country, he absolutely could win. I'm not going to predict. I have no idea. I gave up predicting on elections a very long time ago. But I think anybody who thinks that he can't win is making a mistake.
I mean, I would say he's likely to run. He's likely to get the nomination if he runs, and it's entirely likely that the next president's going to either be a Democrat or a Republican.
Right. It's a jump ball in a 50-50 country.
Anyway,
it
thanks
really
for your
is.
question.
Yeah.
Front row. Yeah. Sorry, I'll focus on the students next.
Thank you very much. First of all, Maggie, thank you. I read your book. It is awesome.
Thank you.
And you did a wonderful job. I know that Trump tries to control the narrative on Twitter and Truth Social. Why does he not email or do text whatsoever?
It's a good question. He doesn't, it's true, he does not like email, he doesn't like text. My sense has always been he has a very long-standing, and I write about this, aversion to notes and leaving sort of record trails. And he would not be the only person in business who has ever been like that. A lot of them are. But I think that that's where it comes from, is I think it's mostly self-preservation.
He's also kind of a technophobe, right? I mean, he doesn't really...
Yeah.
I guess he does a phone thing.
He does the phone. I mean, look, he does write tweets, right? I mean, and he looks at Twitter, and he looks at the replies to his tweets. So I don't know if it's so much technophobe, but certainly he is a trailophobe.
Young-looking person in the middle. There, like sort of, you, stand, I think the one who just, yeah. You're good. Oh, yeah. Green shirt or greenish shirt. Here you go.
Thank you very much. I'm curious how the White House and the presidential experience changed Trump and how it changed you as both a reporter and a human.
A human, I don't know how to answer that one. But thank you for the question. I don't think that Trump, I'm sorry, did you ask if it changed him or if he changed the presidency?
How it changed him, and then how it changed you as a reporter.
So I actually think the main way it changed him, and he said this in an interview at one point, I think it made him more suspicious. I think that he was really, I don't think you can underestimate the impact that the Russia investigation had on how he viewed the first 2 years of his presidency. When he talks about how he says they owe me time, basically. He means that. He feels like his time was taken from him. But I don't think that the office itself left a mark on him the way it has other people. I think there are aspects of it that did. I think that I know he hated writing killed in action letters to the family members of fallen soldiers. Like, that was a big thing for him. I know, and for a couple of reasons, one of which is that I think he didn't want to put his name to a war he didn't believe in. So that's one. I think that the responsibilities and sort of the nature of the presidency, I don't think it changed him, but it certainly surprised him, and I think for the first year intimidated him. But he just doesn't view institutions or norms the way previous presidents have. So,
on the end, second row.
Hello, thank you so much for doing this. So my question is, in the course of your interviews, did you visit Mar-A-Lago, and if so, what was the experience like?
I did. I went twice to Mar-A-Lago and once to Bedminster. And the first time the club was closed down, and I didn't find out why until we were leaving, and it was closed down because there had been a COVID scare. But we were still doing our interview in the middle of the dining room where this was an issue. The second time, the club wasn't closed, but he had some event going on. He didn't seem this way in either of those meetings, but prior to the presidency, when I went to Mar-A-Lago, I was really struck at how much happier he seemed there than almost anywhere else. And I think it's because he really likes the social greeting aspect of it. I think that for every former president, there is this, even without January 6th, there is this sort of, downshifting. The only person I can think of where I didn't see that was President Obama, where there was that famous picture of him parasailing, like right after he left the White House, like a huge grin on his face. But I just think that leaving the presidency behind is really hard for all of them.
Second row, right here. That's you. Here you go. Get the microphone.
Hi, I'm a second year at the Public Policy School. This question is actually for both of you. So you talked about the coverage of Trump in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If we could wave a wand and you could be the news director of the media at large, minus conservative media, how do you think that we should cover the former president in the future for what would you both do differently or the same?
Well, I want to turn this over to Maggie, but
Thanks,
I would
Mark.
no, I would just say, look, I mean, every former president is different. Most former presidents, in fact, every former president until this one has sort of shunned the spotlight. Usually one-term defeated presidents don't immediately become the front runner to run again and continue to have a hold over one of our two major parties. So, I think all the scrutiny that he's gotten since he left office is as important as it was, almost as important as it was when he was in office. So, I think, look, I think the story is just unfolding, but I don't think he's any less relevant than he was the day he left Washington on January 20th.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Mark. I mean, I think that when people ask that question, I think it tends to be with a retrospective, as if you can go back in time. And it's just, he's a former president, and he's a future potential nominee. And he has enormous hold over the party, and the things that he is saying about the 2020 election and his denialism about the election has really trickled down throughout that party. So he can't be ignored. He can be contextualized, but I don't think you can ignore him.
Third row right there. Yeah, you. Yeah.
Have you ever had off-the-record conversations as part of your interview process with Donald Trump, and did you honor that? And the second part of the question is, you've covered him for so long. I imagine that you could have different personal than professional objective opinions about him. Does that deviate much, your personal forgiveness or personal view of him, than your objective?
I'm a reporter, so I'm only going to talk from a reporter's perspective. Even if I had off-the-record conversations with anyone, I can't acknowledge them because then that's breaking me off the record. Sorry.
We have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get as many in as possible. Third row, right there. Okay, there you go.
Hi, and Maggie, you're one of my favorite people ever.
Thanks.
Now, Donald Trump is one thing, but Donald Trumpism is another thing. And the way he has changed the culture of the Republican Party and clearly has exposed some holes in our legal system, political system notwithstanding. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but does 2024 look exponentially worse?
So I think I think there is a lot of in the political system, and to some extent in journalism, refighting the last battle or recovering the last story. Whatever is going to happen in 2024 isn't going to look like what happened in 2020. It could be something different. I think there is probably not enough focus on the fact that a lot of the candidates who are running in the House and in some Senate races, still question the results of 2020. And they're going to be the ones who are certifying the next election. So that I do think is an important story to focus on. I think you are 100% correct that, and this was actually something a Democratic strategist said to me in the transition in 2016, which was the country is about to find out how much of its system is norms, not laws. And Democrats have talked a lot about passing some kind of ethics reform, and that has not happened. So, I don't know what the next 2 years is going to look like, but, I don't think it's going to be an easy time politically in the country.
We have 2 minutes. Let's see if we can squeeze 2 in. You about halfway back. Yeah.
Are there any GOP politicians that Donald Trump truly trusts?
Are there any what's that?
GOP politicians that he truly deep down trusts?
I don't think he trusts most anyone, honestly, deep down. But I think that Jim Jordan probably rises high to the list. I think that I think folks like some members of the House Freedom Caucus, there are a couple of senators, but he tends to be much more skeptical of the GOP Senate.
Second row, sorry, yeah, second row. Sorry, you're the third row. You can. We'll see if we can.
Thank you.
Squeeze two.
Whether he's prosecuted or not, do you, based on what you know of him, think that he has committed any crimes?
My view of that is not relevant, sir. I'm sorry. I understand. I'm not a prosecutor, so I'm not going to accuse someone of a crime.
I'll call it wrongdoing.
I think that there is ample reason to believe that he should not have had, 300 plus classified documents at Mar-A-Lago. But that's as far as I feel like my visibility goes.
Thank you.
I'll get you real quick, and then student, the one that Jennifer's talking. Okay, we'll have you last.
This is just a follow-up to that question. What do you speculate is his motivation for having those really top secret documents at Mar-A-Lago, not the Kim Jong-un?
I think there's a couple of possible reasons, and I'll just do them quickly. I think that one is that he is somebody who really likes trophies, and if you go to tour his corner office at Trump Tower, he has this little area of tchotchkes like Shaquille O'Neal's shoe and things that he points to brag at. So I think that's one answer. I think another answer is that he thought they were leverage of some kind or another. The one that I have a tough time seeing is, I know there's a speculation that he was going to sell them. That's harder for me to see. But those are, I think, the main motives. And also, Chris Christie posited this on ABC last weekend, that he thinks some of this is about Trump kind of wanting to pretend to himself that he's still president. And I think that's a possibility.
Jennifer, the one last one.
This is more of a question about your philosophy of reporting. Joan Didion once said that a writer is always selling someone out.
Confidence, man.
And I guess I wondered generally about your thoughts on that, and then how that applies to reporting about politicians and figures like that. Is any coverage good coverage for them, especially someone in the Trump era?
I mean, I tend not to think of I don't tend to think in terms of what's good or bad for the person I'm writing about. That's their problem, not my problem. And one of the things that one of my favorite editors ever said to me in 2009, when we were having some issue related to someone pitching us a story, and and he said, their problems are not our problems. And I think that's my basic philosophy. Something is either accurate and fair or it's not, but that's how I go about it.
Yeah. Although sometimes their problems, they run for president, they become our problem.
Well, that's a different issue.
Thank you all so much.
These are great questions.
Thank you, Maggie, for being here.